Be up.
It's
Oh, are you recording the stream?
I can. Let me okay. Let's see. All right, we are live on Facebook. Let me
Be up.
Okay, there we are. Hello, everybody.
We are live.
Okay, let's see.
Be up.
Okay, there we are. Hello, everybody. Okay. Sweetie, do you have any headphones I could use? Let's see.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and get us started if you're ready. Or thank you everybody for joining. This is the Conde-Charlotte Museum's first live streamed lecture. Tonight we're joined by Kyes Stevens.
Thank you everybody for joining.
She's the director of the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Program. We're proud to have the opportunity to host their traveling art exhibit, The Art on the Inside. It'll have its opening night Friday, September 9th at 5 p.m. There will be refreshments in the Spanish Courtyard. Don't miss out. We're very excited to show off this wonderful art.
5 p.m.
And Kyes here is going to tell us all about
we're very excited
the wonderful Alabama Prison Arts and Education Program. So I'll just turn it over to her.
Thank y'all so much. So my name is Kyes Stevens, and I am the founder and director of the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project at Auburn University. All of this got started in 2001 when I received a fellowship from the National Endowment of the Arts to teach poetry at the Talladega Federal Prison. I think it is fair to say that this is not exactly what I thought was going to be my career and my life's work. But in very short order, I realized that it would be. In teaching poetry inside of the prisons, I found a very different understanding of people in prison, systems of incarceration, and all of the things that really powerfully influence someone's life and into getting into situations and scenarios where a bad decision is made. And the role of our program is to bring arts and education inside in order to help individuals find something in themselves and see themselves as valuable and as an artist and as a writer and as a scholar, and to use that energy to move through their life. The program started with poetry because I'm a poet. And after several years of teaching poetry in a couple of state facilities here, we were able to procure the funding to support some visual arts classes. We have always asked the people inside what kind of classes they would like, rather than just deciding what kind of classes they might like, and giving people that opportunity to express their desires really, I think, helped our program become more trusted and established in the inside of the prison system. So, and I will apologize, I'm a complete pinball. I try not to be. I can prepare comments until the cows come home, and I can never stay on track, but hang with me, it'll all come together. We teach classes and we believe in learning as a continuum and as a process, that there isn't an end point. And that's true for an individual poem that you are creating, or when you are working on a drawing or a painting, or whatever your endeavor is. And part of that process is understanding that you can't pick up a piece of graphite and draw exactly what you see in your head immediately, that it takes practice to get to that point. And there are foundational skills that inform that. But the classroom space providing opportunities for process is really important inside of prisons, because prisons are in Alabama they're horrid. The conditions are deplorable, and humans have a very hard time surviving. They have a very hard time maintaining hope. They have a very hard time believing in themselves as an artist or as a student. And so the community space of our classroom is very much oriented toward exploring and curiosity and trying something and messing up and then trying again, because the mess up, and especially in the process of creating visual arts pieces, actually becomes a remarkable opportunity. And I don't think that it is too much of a jump to be able to say that people who are able to invest in the artistic process and the revision process and the growing process, that then becomes something that they can apply to their life, that there isn't a disconnect between those two things. I am certain that there are probably some people participating in this this conversation we're having here who are skeptical. There are a lot of influences that that really set how we respond to prisons and people in prison. One of the things that I learned very early on in this process is that people from privileged backgrounds and from really good school districts and from places where there are vibrant arts communities and it is truly accessible to them, those individuals are less likely to be incarcerated. So what you find inside of the Alabama Department of Corrections are individuals who come from school districts that are struggling. They are coming from a county where there might be one art program. They might not have a library that is accessible to them, because the libraries that I was exposed to as a young person are not indicative of libraries across the rest of the state. And understanding, for me, understanding on this very real level, that if you don't have access to creative exploration and even intellectual exploration, it's actually kind of hard to do that on your own, especially as a young person now in this time in our history. So we are trying to plant seeds inside of prison that is based in learning and creating and building community around that, and that community is important. Those of us on this call right now, we are in a community. We're bound together by a shared appreciation for a historical and an arts space, but by nature, we are in community with each other. And there are not a lot of opportunities for positive communities inside of prisons. So we've been working to build that. And where that has a particular input and influence in the art classes is how individuals bolster each other in their learning process. We all know that there are some people who can pick up a pencil and they have a natural inclination that they pick up the idea of perspective. They can see that and translate it onto the page. And then there are other people that it's a struggle. It's a harder step for that individual to learn and understand perspective. That individual might have a natural inclination for expressive drawing or abstract drawing. So the building the community in the classroom and in the art space really allows people with their natural abilities and their natural inclinations to support each other. Our classes typically are 14 weeks long. They meet once a week for 2 to 3 hours. So that means that you have the entire rest of that week to work. And that also means that you have the entire rest of that week not to have access to the art professor or whoever is leading the class. And so you have to lean on your peers. And there, by necessity, there is a community that emerges from that. And the results are beautiful. From the artwork that you will see when you come to the opening on Friday, you will see every skill level imaginable, right? From somebody who has been sketching and learning on their own for years to somebody who literally showed up to our class and said, I want to draw and I can draw a stick person. Our goal with the Art on the Inside exhibit has always been to include works from all skill levels and all subject matters and all vantage points, because the diversity of the exhibition, and in my opinion, needs to reflect the diversity of people inside, who are working diligently and creating. A lot of people ask us, how are we funded? What are your plans? How many classes are you going to do? Everything that we do is determined by external funding, which is grant dollars. The National Endowment for the Arts has been an extraordinary supporter of our program for 20 years, as has the Alabama State Council on the Arts. And then we have other foundations and donors around the country who have invested in our program. So much of what we do is, I don't want to say controlled, that's not the best word, but it's very much influenced by how we are able to generate funds. And you can imagine that there are people who have absolute inclination to support a program like this, and then there are people who don't, for whatever their reason is. So what we are able to do is supported by people like yourselves and foundations, and we try to make those funds go as far as humanly possible to create lots of dynamic opportunities. One example of how long it takes sometimes for us to be able to bring a program to fruition. I was in San Quentin many years ago visiting their arts and corrections program out in California, and they had a dedicated art studio for the men at San Quentin to use, which is something that we definitely aspire to. But I walked into this space and all of these guys were sitting there hunched over a table, collaboratively working on a very large lino cut, that they were doing printmaking there. And what struck me so much about this is we all have our preconceived notions about who is incarcerated and what they must be like and all of the dynamics. And then you walk into this space and you could have been walking into a printmaking studio anywhere in the country and people would have been doing the same thing. And the beauty that comes from that, and what I would argue is the absolute fundamental human need for art and creativity. When I was talking with the docents earlier this morning, I mentioned over and over again the humanness and our need to create, and that creation is a very important part of communication for us. It's one way to bridge gaps that we would otherwise have a very hard time bridging. So when you come to the exhibit on Friday or in the future when you come, there's going to be a gap that is bridged in terms of your understanding of people inside and what they are trying to do and then what they are working toward in their life. The Art on the Inside exhibit, our first one was in 2005, actually down in Fairhope, and it has traveled all over the US and we're very excited to have it in Mobile right now. The content for the exhibit changes. So because we have ongoing art classes, we add pieces into the exhibition and shuffle things out. to keep it dynamic and interesting for people who are repeat viewers of the exhibit. And when I was talking with Jim earlier, I had said to him that typically what my interaction is and things like this is to talk for a little while about our program and then try to open up a dialogue, because the conversation, you asking questions and me responding to particular needs or interests, I think really produces a much more fruitful interaction rather than me just droning on and on. So what I would like to do is open the floor up for some comments and questions, and let's just let this evolve a little bit. I'm assuming that we could maybe type those in the chat, or Jim, you got an idea on how best to do that?
Yeah, if you're watching at home, if you have any questions, please, if you're on Facebook, just type in the comment box there. If you're on Instagram, at the bottom of the screen there, you can add a comment. Share any questions you have. I did realize about 10 minutes into the live stream that Instagram wasn't working, so I had to start it mid conversation. Where do you okay, we got a question here. Where do you receive supplies? Where and how?
Okay, good question. So we typically order all of our art supplies in mass, typically from Utrecht or Dick Blick. The Department of Corrections has a lot of restrictions about what materials can come in, and we have approved items that we've used for years and years, and so we just purchase the same thing. As you can imagine, there's a very large difference between the needs for a drawing class or a charcoal class versus a watercolor class or even the printmaking class.
And somebody added on to that, and the financial responsibilities question mark. I think they're asking like how you guys manage all that, I'm assuming.
So with each and every grant that we get, those individual grants have their own structures of accounting and reporting that are required. And most of them, of course, run on completely different funding cycles, which makes for a very exciting interaction with grants all of the time. But we're a program of Auburn University, so when we apply for funding, it is Auburn University applying in conjunction with the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project. And maybe that's helpful.
And somebody asked, hey, I missed the introduction. Where are you from, and how did you develop the program in Alabama?
Where am I from? So my family has been in Alabama for a long time. So I was actually born in Opelika at the hospital there, and spent my first few years of my life in Auburn, and then spent the majority of my life in Waverly, Alabama, which is a speck of a town north of Auburn. I went to graduate school in New York, so I was out of the state for a little while, but most of my life has been here. And why did I develop the program in Alabama? I walk inside of prisons and I see human beings. I don't see a prisoner. And I am an educator and an artist to my core, and everything in my DNA orients me toward, if people want to learn, then build the space and the opportunity for that to happen. And in the early classes that I taught, when the program was really just kind of getting moving, I realized that the vast majority of people in the classroom never had the opportunity to take the kinds of classes that we were offering, and they were desperate to.
And we have a couple people asking, is your artwork is the artwork for sale? Are there ever pieces, you know, that go up for sale? Where do those proceeds go?
We do. We do on occasion sell some of the artwork. Most of that is actually related to our personnel bandwidth to be able to facilitate that, and that unfortunately right now is not super significant. But when we sell, students and participants in classes will donate artwork to the program. And when that artwork is sold, we use that money to support more classes. And that's it. That's the only thing that we will use that funding for. So we've had artists inside who have, through their generosity, supported the sale of enough artwork to be able to fund 2 art classes.
Now, I know you mentioned before, you know, you're really limited on what supplies you can work with your students. Do you ever, like, you know, have you ever had the freedom to let your students use, like, you know, things non-conventional, like like sculpting, or, you know, I guess clay, things like that?
We have done some non-conventional projects, and there are, I mean, we've done a printmaking class here in Alabama, and if any of you are, several printmaking classes actually, if you are familiar with that process, the tool, the gouge is they're very sharp, and could very easily be considered a weapon on the inside. But we have such an amazing relationship with the Alabama Department of Corrections, and they trust us, and they know that we proceed with great care with our supplies. So we just have a checkout system for tools. We've used X-Acto knives in classes for intricate paper cutting. It's just really a broad spectrum. We do try to focus on classes that utilize a medium that participants can engage with after the class is done. So the printmaking class is not really something that they can do because the materials and the supplies are so bulky and could honestly create some issues if they weren't handled with care. So we do a lot of charcoal, a lot of graphite. These days we do a lot of watercolor classes. They are incredibly popular.
Do the artists ever get to see photos of these special exhibits, or learn about the venues that host their art?
They do, and I appreciate that question. We photograph, or we enlist our partners in the exhibition to photograph the work, and then we send a summary. If there is a PR piece that comes out in relationship to the exhibition, we'll include a copy of that, and then we mail that to everyone who has a piece included in the show, because they would not otherwise be able to see the work on display.
Do art teachers ever come and teach classes, or
Yes, we have at this point, over our over 20-year history, we've had over 200 teachers and instructors work with us, and these range from teaching artists to physicists to musicians to writers. I mean, the whole gamut. One of the things about our program, I think, that's really important to note at this point is we started with arts and humanities and with poetry. And the arts really allowed a pathway for us to grow and build a pretty remarkable program inside of the prisons. Starting in 2017, we were able to build the first ever Bachelor of Science degree program inside of the prison. So we currently have Auburn University students inside working on their degree, and many of the individuals who are in that program had their first experience with our program in these arts and humanities classes. And that may or may not have answered that question completely. Sorry.
We got another question. When you say mediums they can do after the class, do you mean while they're still incarcerated or after their release?
While they are incarcerated. You know, for those of you who are practicing artists, you understand that art materials are incredibly expensive, and most individuals inside do not have the economic means to continue to buy materials. So we really try to teach and encourage and empower students in a way that if you have a pen or a pencil, you can draw. It might not be the preferred method, but it is a method. And the results of those, you know, I just have a pen and a piece of paper is pretty remarkable.
Now this is a question I have. I think it's just so fascinating. And you mentioned on your website that the human-centric language you use when discussing this program. In the classes, do you feel like, you know, there's a noticeable like reaction that your students have to that? Like how is that translated like in the class?
Yes. So I'll give you an example. It's not from an art class, but we were teaching a course at Donaldson Correctional, which is up in West Jefferson County. And it was the first day of class, and we're moving through, you know, the introductions and the paperwork, and we're making sure that people are there. And so I'm literally going down the roll sheet and calling off names. And I get to a name and I call it, and there's no response, and I call it again, and I'm getting ready to move on, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy kind of punch the fella next to him in the arm, and he said, "Yo, dude, she's talking to you." And he did not recognize his name being called, because they're never called by their name inside. And so if we want people to thrive and become and come out of prison feeling like a human being and feeling possibility and hope, we actually have to call them by their name, because just derogatory language and not seeing the humanness doesn't inspire someone to grow and to move in any kind of interaction that they're working with inside. So we don't use the language of incarceration with our program, because we see people who come to our classes as artists and students and thinkers. The same way we would see them when they come into a classroom on Auburn's campus or in any kind of community education environment.
And this program that you do when you go to these prisons, you only go to men's prisons, women's prisons, or like who gets to attend these classes?
So we work with men's and women's facilities in Alabama that are state-run facilities. We are not currently doing any programming with the youth facilities, although we have in the past. And our art classes they fall under our category of community education, and they are open enrollment. So whoever is interested in the class can sign up. And always there are more people wanting in the class than there is space. But the really beautiful thing that happens with that, and we ask our students and participants to do this, for every person that doesn't make it right into the classroom, take the information and you become the teacher. You know, show the individual what you learned, share the poem, you know, share the short story, whatever is going on, you know, you use it as the I don't know if y'all are familiar with Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift, but it's like the gift is continuing to give the art, right? That it doesn't belong to us. We don't hold it. We keep passing it forward. And that isn't necessarily, and there's not an economy associated with that. It's, I guess, kind of just being a good human.
And I got a couple of questions here. I'm going to combine them together because I think they kind of match up pretty well. Can you give a couple examples of success stories from this program? And another question: do any alums from your classes ever come back and volunteer after being released?
Those are great questions. So we are, as a program, I guess when I started doing this work very early on, I decided that I would not ever pressure someone to be a spokesperson for their experience with our program. And there are a couple of reasons behind this. One, we don't want them to feel like they are beholden to us or that they owe us anything because we provided a class or an opportunity. That's not a dynamic that we want to see emerge come out of our program. And we also fundamentally understand that being incarcerated in the state of Alabama is extraordinarily traumatic. Most people who come out of incarceration have post-traumatic stress disorder, and triggers are real. And so we don't want to put that pressure on someone. If we have someone who has taken classes with us, if they reach out to us and they would like to be involved, that's a complete different story, right? That's their decision and no pressure from us. And yes, we welcome them to work with our program. We think it's really important to grow our community in that way.
Awesome. Okay, I guess this is a weird question. This goes back to the whole, dehumanizing language, and you had mentioned this before. When you're dealing with people outside learning about this program, sometimes you don't get so much of a positive reaction. I guess people think that like, oh yeah, why should I care, what these people on the inside, if they get to draw or not, because they're criminals. How do you combat that mindset in people that are I guess kind of adverse to the idea of this program?
To be fair, there are not many folks who have ever said something to me directly in a negative way about the program. And though we know that there are people who think it, and I understand that everything having to do with mass incarceration and people in prisons and harm and crimes, this is all very, very complex. It's very emotional. It is fraught. We believe that all human beings should have access to art and learning, and that the equality engagement with art and creativity allows an individual to see themselves in ways they might not have been able to see themselves before. And I laughingly call it the nerd switch, right? Once somebody flips on their nerd switch, whatever it is that they get really excited about with learning or making, you kind of fundamentally shift as a human being, because your perception and your understanding of the world shifts. You're constantly on a quest to understand and be involved in whatever your interest area is. And that pathway bolsters human beings. and not just people who are in prison. That's, it's like, why does anybody go to school? Why does anybody go to college? Why does anybody decide that they want to go to art school? Or because they want to do something. And many of our students haven't had the opportunity to do that in the past. And over this 20-year period of this program, I could not possibly count the number of times that people will say, I always wanted to learn how to do X, and this is my first opportunity to do that. And that breaks my heart as a human being and as a mostly lifelong resident of the state of Alabama, that we don't help people thrive. So we believe in a better world. We want a better world. We want people happy. We want families thriving. We want communities thriving. And the more we invest in education and supports and believing in each other, the more likely it is that that will become.
I have another question here. How many people do you regularly have in the program? Or I might be asking in general across the state, but how many people are usually in the classes too?
Okay, it varies on the facility, and the reason it varies on the facility is that there's not an abundance of educational spaces inside of the prisons. So we might be doing a class at a facility that can only have 12 people in the room. So we'll have 12 people in the room. Sometimes we have 25 people in the room. It really depends. Over the 21 years at this point this program has existed, we've had close to 6,000 people take our classes inside. And we know it works because people keep coming and they're clamoring for the experience. And we know it works because they talk to us about how it's helping them rebuild relationships with their family and their kids, and how it ignites in them a pathway. There was a gentleman, we had a warden call once and basically say, I want to know when you're bringing your program to my facility. And I was a little taken aback by that directness, but I appreciated it. So I went up and got a poetry class started there. And at the end of the class, there was one gentleman in the class who was really moved by his experience. And you could tell, like, fundamentally, there was some kind of shift that had happened in him. And I got a letter from him 3 months after the conclusion of the class. And he said, well, I signed up for the class because there isn't anything to do here. I wasn't really interested in poetry, but there is literally nothing to do here. He was like, and it's summer, and this class was going to be in the administrative building, which means I could be in air conditioning for 2.5 hours. And he went on, and then finally he said it was the first thing he had ever completed in his life, and he realized that he could do something, and so he decided to go to trade school to get a welding certificate. And for me, right, it's just like, yes, right, sometimes you have to have an experience or an opportunity that is about celebrating who you are as a human instead of reminding you about what you have done to end up in this place, that helps you get on a path to seeing yourself as a different kind of human and a different kind of interaction with living. It's remarkable to hear those stories and to learn about what people are doing and how they're thriving after class.
Man, that's so inspiring to hear how, this program can, something just like an art class or poetry class can really just transform a person's life. That's really awesome to hear about. We got another question here. Given the trauma you described about mass incarceration, do you feel that when you're observing the class, do you feel that that trauma is sometimes reflected in their art, or do you think also the artwork is therapeutic for them?
So yes and yes. I think it's, as artists and as creative people, we respond to what we are surrounded by. And I, there are many times where people are writing about the circumstance of incarceration, or writing about, very predominantly, how much they miss their families. And one thing that's really important, we don't ever ask someone to delve into or describe or anything having to do with why they are incarcerated. If they do, that's their decision. That's not why we push, or how we push. We push for exploration and tapping into our inner creative selves. The work that does address the place of the prison is heartbreaking, and you combine that with all of what we know about the prisons and how hard the conditions are. It's heartbreaking. It is. But do people find something in their experience in our class and their process of creating that helps them? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say that is true for every single artist I know and every single writer I know. So it's no exception inside of the prisons.
What type of degree does a student achieve from Auburn in this program?
So we have just a little background on how the college degree program came to be. In 2015, during the Obama administration, the U.S. Department of Education opened up a call for what's called Second Chance Pell. Pell funds were taken away from people who were incarcerated in 1994, and it basically collapsed every academic degree program inside in the country. There were some to remain, but it was catastrophic. And because we know the amount of education that someone gets while they are inside, the more likely they are to stay out once they are released. And because we had so many people desperately, constantly saying, when can we have a degree? When can we have a degree? We, Auburn University, applied to be part of Second Chance Pell. And we were accepted into that program. So the degree that we offer is an interdisciplinary studies degree that combines business, human development, and family studies, and leadership. There's only one course of study. So we tried to build a degree curriculum that would help the largest number of people with the very vast interests that they had for what they would like to do. And next year, I'll just tag on very quickly. Next year, we are on track to have our first students graduate with a degree.
Oh, that's very exciting. Are there ever waiting lists for these classes? Are there any limitations on how many people can participate?
There's a constant waiting list. I mean, we have, let me just put it this way. There isn't enough. We can't offer enough for the need. And the not ever enough is influenced by funding, but it's also influenced by space. a lot of individuals who teach with our program, once they teach a single class, they are in, like they want to keep teaching, because it is such an engaging and dynamic educational community. But there are a lot of factors. And of course, when COVID was raging at its fullest, we were not able to get in, which was hard.
Have any other states contact you to learn how to replicate this amazing program in their state prison systems? And are there any partner states?
So I probably could not get to the end of the list of people that I have talked to around the country in terms of building programs and how to build relationships with departments of corrections and universities and funders and supporters, because I have been doing this so long in the field. It's very important for me to talk with and assist and support other people who are trying to build programming, because we need more of it. But as an example of just kind of the scope of and reach of our program, earlier this year in spring semester, we had a Fulbright scholar come from the Northern Territory of Australia to spend the semester with us to learn how we do to go back and then implement that in the Northern Territory of Australia. So it's a broad impact.
Do you employ any volunteer teachers?
So we don't really have volunteer teachers. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, when I first started building the program, and if you are an artist on participating on this Zoom lecture, in your head, count the number of times that somebody has asked you to do something for nothing. And you want to, because you believe in art and you believe in access and you believe in opportunity, and artists have to pay their bills too. They have student loans too. And so it is very important that we compensate our teachers. Trust me, no one is getting a windfall of cash from teaching with us, but it is an acknowledgement of the work and the effort and the time that goes into teaching, because it is not a small amount of time. The prisons are not usually easy to get to, so you drive, then you wait to get into the classroom. I mean, it's a large amount of time. But if somebody wants to teach with us and they are hell-bent on absolutely not getting paid, then we'll talk. But fundamentally, we like to compensate people for their work.
So besides funding, what other challenges do you face running the program?
Oh, well, that's a big question. As a human being, part of the challenge for me is seeing so many people who are literally desperate for the opportunity to build their life and to make amends, and who want to help shift their communities, and they don't want young people making the decisions that they made. Seeing them inside and not being able to be those change agents, that's hard, because when you are an educator and you go in and you teach people, there is no way that you don't have some kind of relationship with them. And you imagine teaching and interacting with people over a 20-year history, those relationships become more substantial. And I'm not meaning like in the nitty gritty of each other's lives, but just invested in that person as an artist or a scholar. So personally, that is hard for me. And it's hard to be in a state sometimes that can't really offer second chances and forgiveness. Most people who are incarcerated, they'll be completely honest with you. They made terrible decisions or just a sequence of bad decisions. When I first started teaching at Tutwiler, I had a woman who was sitting next to me. We were kind of in a horseshoe, and she just, looked at me and she said, "You want to know why I'm here?" And I'm like, "I assume you want to write poetry." And everybody kind of laughed. And she's like, "That's not what I meant." And I said, "No, I don't need to know any of that. It doesn't matter." And she said, "I write bad checks at the grocery store to feed my kids. And I knowingly write bad checks at the grocery store." And she's not alone in that. The number of people making really not great decisions because they're desperate. They're desperate to eat. They're desperate for X, Y, and Z. A number of military vets who are incarcerated is stunning. So, people are incarcerated and people make all kinds of bad decisions, but they're still people. And they still want their life to matter and have meaning. And most of our students are desperate to make amends. They want to leave a positive mark on the world instead of the one that they left, which is the reason they're incarcerated.
What are your goals and dreams for this program in the next 5 years? Both practical and I guess kind of like in an intangible, inspirational sense.
Well, my goal is, on the most basic level, is to always continue to exist. My biggest fear has always been that our program disappears and then there is nothing for people inside. And I do want to say that I would say that for any community that I was working in, right? This just happens to be the community that put itself in my path. I said I opened up by saying that I got a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts to teach poetry at the Talladega Federal Prison. Well, the reason I got that was not because I'm such an outstanding poet. Trust me, I was the only poet who would take it. So it seems like the universe wanted me to do this thing. And when I walked in, I just saw potential. And yeah, so the goal is that we continue to exist and we continue to make spaces for people to come and learn and be and see possibility, and that they pass that on to everybody else in their life. And, aspirationally, wow, it would be amazing to have an endowment so that we did not have to spend all of our time fundraising, because it's really hard. In any person running an arts organization or a nonprofit understands this. You spend so much time seeking funding and trying to make sure you can pay your people. And wouldn't it be remarkable to be able to invest all that energy and creativity and brain power into imagining more programming and working to build more partnerships? So I really, I'm so pleased that the exhibit is down in Mobile, and I'm super excited to hear from you. And I mean that. And it can be any kind of feedback whatsoever, because that helps us grow. In all questions, all perspectives, all philosophies raise our consciousness about this work and help us do a better job at doing what we do. But we deeply love the art exhibit, the traveling art exhibit. I really think that you will be struck by what you see. Oop, you're on mute.
Oop, there we go. We're really glad and excited that we get the opportunity to host this traveling exhibit. I had the pleasure of being able to look through a lot of the art today while we were setting it up, and I am really excited to be able to be a part of sharing that with people. Sadly, Instagram limits us to just an hour, so we are going to have to wrap things up. Before we go, is there anything you want to just put out there to everybody?
Well, if this is not just a shameless plug for funding our program, please, if you are able, invest in arts programming and educational programming in under-resourced and rural areas in Alabama. Our folks need you. And the more we invest in folks before incarceration, the less people end up in prison.
Oh,
And thank you.
We want to say thank you. We got a few thank yous in the chat. Yeah, and if you're watching at home, please come by this Friday, the 9th. We're having a opening night for the Art on the Inside exhibit. It's free to come in. You get to look around the museum and see all the art. There's refreshments in the Spanish courtyard. We'd love to have you over. The exhibit will be in the museum all the way till I think early November. So please come by and check it out. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mary Lee, you just got to hit the stop stream on the bottom of the Zoom page.